So, Carolyn Grant, thank you so much for joining us on Nomadic Diaries today. Let me ask you the first question. We're here to talk about the Belonging series, and this is Nomadic Diaries special podcasting reports on the topic of belonging as it relates to nomads, expatriates, and third culture kids. So, welcome. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Doreen.
So you're an expert in life transitions, right? So can you talk to us about how do life transitions typically impact someone's sense of belonging or their sense of community?
Right. If I can start by just saying what transitions are, because often there's what is different to a transition and a change. So
Right.
a change is something that's happening externally. So it's the move to a different country, it's a new job, it's a new stage of life. And the transition is what's happening on the internal side of us. It's the psychological response to the change. So often the change is really quick. A decision is made, we're heading somewhere, but the transition is the adaptation process to make sense of the change and finally realize, wow, what all does that impact once we're going? And one of the things is belonging, because if you think about, I like to talk about transition as a bridge with these markers along the way. And if the first marker is where you currently are, settled, you belong to the community, you have roles, you have responsibilities, you feel safe and secure. The next step on the bridge, as you step off solid ground, is it's called the unsettled phase. It's very unsettling because you suddenly realize, I'm going to have to let go of some things. And one of those is this feeling that you fit in somewhere and you belong and you have somewhere to show up every day and everyone's expecting you. So that can be the first experience of pulling away. And sometimes the accompanying feelings are rejection, resentment, like, do people even want me here anymore now that they know I'm leaving? And then the middle of the bridge, when you're right dangling over the river, is the chaos phase, is what we like to call of transition, where there's a real feeling of disconnection because you haven't connected with the new community yet, and you've completely left the old one behind. And it can be a really anxious place where people don't know who they are, where they fit in, where they belong anymore. And they haven't quite figured out what to do. There's anxiety, depression, confusion, all sorts of emotions that'll come up then. So the fourth stage on the bridge is when we have this tentative level of acceptance that we have left behind the safer shores where we were known. And this stage is called the resettling point on the bridge. You start with those superficial ties to the community. There's some level of exhaustion as you feel like you have to keep inserting yourself into the new community and initiating new relationships and new tasks to do. And belonging can sometimes still feel quite a way off. But eventually you reach the other side of the bridge to the new settled place on terra firma again, where you start realizing, oh, I do have a role in this new community. I do have responsibilities. I once again feel like I belong and I feel safe and secure. So I think to answer your question, Doreen, is really seeing this process as from a start to finish and noticing how our levels of feeling that we belong change along the way.
And I love that you started with unsettled. That is the name of the book that I'm almost finished writing, but
Oh,
it is completely oriented towards repatriation. And
yes.
so the title of the book is Unsettled, when home doesn't feel like home.
I think that's one of the most difficult things for the clients that I work with is when coming home doesn't feel like home. So well done. I think that'll be a good read.
Well done when it's finished. Well, thank you for giving us that the geography of transitions, because that really establishes the foundation upon which we can now ask you the question about how life transitions can impact that sense of belonging a little more.
Right. So I think whenever there is change, we tend to self-reflect. It's almost a time in your life where you can look at your life from the outside because you're not stuck doing the same things that you do every day when you belong to a community. So the first time there's this distance to be looking at your life and say, wow, where, if I don't fit here, where do I fit? Where do I belong? And it can be a real uncomfortable feeling for people, just that uncertainty of where they are supposed to feel like they have purpose again. I think because meaning and purpose is such a need for us as human beings, there can also be a lack of joy when you don't have the community reflecting to you how happy they are to see you. You know, when you're in a new community and no one knows you, there's really a lack of joy too that can be experienced because you're not feeling like you belong just yet.
That's a
Carolyn,
very good way of putting it.
yes, I'm really curious about your personal experiences on the transition bridge. Would you care to share an experience and story from your own, maybe country transition or life stage transition, or if you want to share a story from a client maybe you work with, can you give us a practical depiction, walk us through what that looks like from personal experience or who you
Right.
work with?
Of course, I don't mind. And if you, I'll use an African analogy or metaphor, if I may. Um, I wrote a blog and I named it The Ear of the Hippo. So for those of you in the northern hemisphere, you'll think of an iceberg, and we only ever get to see the tip of the iceberg, which hides this huge um, dangerous thing underneath the water. So in Africa, we rather say the ear of the hippo because all you see above the water is these two tiny little ears, which which hides this huge dangerous animal underneath the water. And for me, that was how it felt. So leaving South Africa when I was just newly married and moving to London was my first international move. And I think I was too young to recognize what I was leaving behind, or too naive, or too excited about the future to even name the losses of the things that I would leave behind, and not aware of the consequences of my choices just yet. But it was only 10 years later when we moved to America from London and I got news of my mother being ill that I wrote to my friends in London and said, oh, I'm so sad about this, but while I'm telling you about the imminent loss of my mother, I'm also recognizing I have lost so much living in London. I've lost those, you know, the tangible losses of going to the playground with the kids every week and, you know, having friends who knew you when you were having babies and they knew my mother. So there was all these connections. And I sat writing a list of losses. And it felt like this hippo emerging from the water and like this huge sense of loss that I'd never actually tapped into before. And I think for me, that was the beginning of realizing how much loss was associated with change. And in that was this deep sense of, yes, I haven't found my place where I belong yet. I've been in all these different places, but I've lost that sense of where I belong. I haven't found it yet. I've moved twice, and particularly related to belonging, there was this change. Change brings loss. Loss brings grief, and in that grief is this recognition too that what if I don't belong anywhere anymore? You know, where do I belong? So I don't know if that answers your question, Megan.
Yeah, you're dealing with such heavy emotions sometimes that it is that hippo that you feel like it's sitting on your chest.
Right.
I'm wondering how, because transitions are a normal process, not even when we're talking about life stages, not even talking about maybe a grandiose move to another country, but how can we reframe then transition as normal, and how can you help people find stability during change?
Mhm. I think that's what I ended up doing then, was realizing I need to read up about what I'm feeling and what all is going on inside me. And that's when I came across William Bridges' book on transitions, and I came across David Pollock's book on third culture kids. And I finally had language for what I was experiencing. And I think in that was this phrase, like, this is a normal process, which just made me say, oh, okay, I'm not going crazy. I'm not going mad. Like, all these feelings of anxiety or grief or um, confusion or chaos are just part of this adapting to the changes that have been happening around me. And I chose the changes. It wasn't even that they happened to me, I chose them. And yet still I hadn't figured out the loss and gain with any change or any choice that you make. Sometimes, there's a positive, but there's often always a loss associated with it. So I find when I'm talking to clients and I get to show them this bridge and the different emotions at each stage and say, this is normal. If you're feeling like you have these exaggerated emotions, look, it's right here in the column. And I can see a visible sense of relief as they say, oh, okay, I thought it was just me. So I think that's the beauty of normalizing any emotion or any process, is just helping people feel like, oh, it's not just me.
Definitely. And I think normalization is also for those of us who are, there's the belonging part of it, but there's also the adoption part of it. There's also those of us who can be more trained, more aware, more sensitive, and more hyper vigilant in how we are making people welcome.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Because, we talk a lot about the belonging side of it, which is, making ourselves welcome and welcoming ourselves into new communities. But how often do we hear people talking about, the responsibility for all of us, if we know someone has moved or we're in a community where there's lots of transition, then I think we have a bit of responsibility too, don't we?
Absolutely. And I think that's what I then turned around to do once I had made sense of my experience. I started a group in my school community for other expat moms and immigrant moms. And it ended up being even moms moving from new states, just to say, I can see this is hard. I know this is not easy. And I would encourage then the community that I had started building to reach out and say, how can we help you? How can we make you feel like you're one of us here in this new city that you've just arrived in? So I do see both sides of, and I think the hard thing though, Doreen, is a lot of the initiation does have to come from the person who has moved, which is exhausting. But I would love to raise awareness in any community. Reach out to the new person, make sure that
Yes.
they feel welcome. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there is an onus on the person who is coming into the new community to also be brave. I do think that there is a level of courageousness
Mm-hmm.
in doing this. And Megan and I just had a conversation with someone recently on the subject of the difference between in-person experiences and online experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more we can actually do things that involve all of our senses, like, your groups, that type of thing, that makes, I think, a huge difference in people's level of settling physically. Or my question is, does it make a difference?
Yes, it does. I know I used to run the groups in person, and just that mirroring that happens between your empathy as someone tells their story, I could see magic happening, and just happen in the group, and people would build connections going, oh, you've heard my story. You know now a little bit of who I am and how I got here. The groups did have to move online during COVID, and it wasn't quite the same. So I will say there is definitely that in person, just like I was saying earlier, when we mirror that joy and delight to see someone, it's much harder to do over a screen. I know we're getting better at it, but I do prefer an in person, give you a hug at the end, and that physical feeling like you're welcome here, you're accepted, we're happy to see you. I think it counts for a lot.
Yeah, I'm wondering how people find your community groups. It seems that you have several people who are that it's relevant for, whether they've moved from, a different state or a different country.
Right. I mean, I was just advertising through the school that my children went to. So it was almost part of their welcome to the school program that I would stand up and say, and if anyone is even not just new to the school, but new to the city, join my group. And I would run. So I don't advertise, let's put it that way. And my kids have grown. So I've almost stopped doing that side of things. But I do now work more with missionary families or expat families with similar things, just trying to help them navigate and give them language for the experience that they're going through.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. Hmm. Yeah, I love how your work also speaks into not just TCKs but CCKs
Mhm.
with thinking about educational CCKs, also adoption stories and immigrant families. You're really widening the definition and inclusivity. I think that's really important.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's where Ruth Van Reken and David Pollock gave me the language to go, oh, there's so many that this affects. And once I know something, I have to tell everyone. So I just did a talk last night with an adoption group to give them insight. And it was so well received because I think often as an adoptive parent, there's not that awareness that my child might feel different to me, even though you've done all the right things, you've provided all the love, all the support, all the things that they might not have had they not been adopted. I was able to explain what it feels like for me to be a hidden immigrant where I look the same as everyone in my Texan neighborhood, but when I open my mouth, I'm very different and my thoughts are different. And so similarly for a CCK, like an international adoptee, they have the opposite experience where they look different, but when they open their mouth, they sound exactly the same as the family they've been raised in. And just that almost too much attention you get when everyone says, "Oh, I love your accent." I'm like, "Thank you. Do you want to know who I am rather than just that I have a cute accent?" It's just something that I know these kids also struggle with. Can I not be the other? Can I just
Mm.
belong here? Can I just fit in?
Mm.
So that's just one of the areas that I do some work into.
Yeah, and that's I've spent a long time in America. I spent 12 years in America the first time, and then I spent about maybe 7 years in America the second time. And I code switch all the time. When I'm playing pickleball, I might use more Scottish, and I'm always constantly code switching.
Hmm.
Um, and it's been a real journey, a real painful journey in many cases. And I think now people are a little bit more free than, say, 40 years ago when I arrived in Louisiana 45 years ago. And it was not okay to be who I was.
Mm, hmm, hmm.
The name got changed, my story got changed. Everything was different. It was very different. So I do think there is some more grace in society, but nevertheless, I think we all need to be practicing even more grace with people who are hidden immigrants, because I think that's a whole category that it's like being a flyover state, right, Megan?
Right.
You effectively are a flyover state when you're a hidden immigrant, because nobody, there's nothing that we don't land on that idea. It's not something that we have in our language. People don't know who you are or why you are. So I get what you went through, Carolyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Doreen. Mhm.
So, Carolyn, what tools or practices do you recommend to help people rebuild their sense of belonging during transitions?
That's a good question, Megan. I think one of the main things is to acknowledge the losses and the things you've had to leave behind. I think when we minimize that and pretend it's not a big deal and we're happy to move on, we don't go through the grief process, and we get stuck in denial or resentment that we've had to leave things behind. And It's only when we go through all those stages of grief and get to acceptance that we actually have to move on, that we can start belonging again. So I think that was a long journey for me, and I'm almost embarrassed to say how long because I call myself an accidental immigrant because we never planned to stay away as long as we have. So I always had this narrative in my head that we would go back to South Africa. I always had this dream that I would raise my children with my sister's children, that they would have cousins like I did growing up on the farm. And I just couldn't let go of that dream. And it was really only during COVID, when there was no way that I could go home, like there wasn't even an option to go home, that I had to start accepting the fact that I wouldn't be going home. Which I should have realized long ago, because my kids had already been in school for 10 to 15 years in America. So it just, and I hope in my vulnerability, someone can say, okay, it's not just me who's hanging on to this dream that I'll go back someday. But all to say, once I acknowledged, okay, this is the closing of one thing, then the relationships that had felt temporary in Austin could finally feel like they were real. These are my friends. This is my future. This is where I'm putting down roots now. And that shift internally, of course, then had an effect externally. So I think the main thing for me is acknowledging the losses, letting them go so that you can make space for the new. Yeah, that's really probably the most thing. And then, like I've said before, the just recognizing the onus is on you to initiate new friendships, initiate relationships, initiate ways to belong. Like, do I join a pickleball group, or do I join the gym, or do I, whatever it takes to put yourself in the community. You can't sit back and wait for them to reach out to you, as nice as that would be. I think the other thing is finding a mentor, someone who may have gone through something similar to you, so that you can just ask questions and say, how do I do this? What would be the best way? Join a church. Those are all the things. But I will also say there's a difference between fitting in and belonging. So I know when we first arrived in America, I tried my hardest to fit in. I decorated my house for the holidays. I did all the right things that I thought were very American. And I tried to fit in, and still had this deep sense of, I just don't belong here. And that really just took time. It took me realizing it was really my faith that made me realize I have to belong to a bigger picture. Like, God is here as much as he is anywhere else. And it was because sometimes we can get into our heads about belonging, and our personalities can be the sensitive types that don't easily accept that we do belong. So again, I think it's time, it's effort, and it's getting your head around future orientation thinking rather than getting stuck in the past.
Well, I don't want to spring this question on you for it to be too surprising, but I'm really curious, and I've been asking people recently, where does faith fit into belonging? When you pack up, I think I see people packing themselves up and their belongings up and some of their mental baggage up, but then we move. And I've also witnessed that in that relocation, faith can also change or be challenged. Can you talk a little bit about how faith, whatever faith it is, and belonging are connected?
That is a big question, Doreen.
I know. I'm always the one that asks the hard question. Sorry.
No, I like it. I do. I like it. I think for me, and again, if I may use a metaphor, I was on a hike in South Africa, and I saw this fig tree hanging from a cliff in a gorge we were walking through. And I thought, how on earth did you get there? And how on earth did you survive? And I imagined a bird dropping a seed and this one little tree trying to cling for life to this cliff face. And as I looked at it, I saw the roots finding its way down, all the way down, 50 feet high to the river that was below. And I thought, wow, that's now a picture of survival. And it resonated with me because I thought, for me, the river represented God. And if he had not been with me in some very difficult times, when you do feel like you are rootless and restless and don't know where to land, a consistent faith that he is with me and wherever I go, and even though I'm hanging on a cliff, I can find my way down to him. That for me was how I say faith has been a grounding force, that it doesn't matter where I am or where I'm not, where I fit in or where I don't. I have him as a constant, and my faith is a constant. And I've seen missionaries who have, and myself, my faith was tested through all of this, because you do ask, where are you, God? Why aren't you with, where have you been?
Carolyn, I read your blog post about this experience in your life, and really resonated with me because I often use the analogy of a garden when talking about belonging, and how different seasons a garden will look different. And I think about in some of the harshest winters I've experienced, there looks like there's no growth and there's no beauty, but in that season, it's underneath the unseen, the dark seed that's actually generating the energy, and making its way up for the spring growth. And so sometimes I think about seasons of my belonging when I haven't felt the fruits of where is my community. And it is that struggle at the beginning of that winter season that I have to be patient and know that there needs to be the watering and that energy that's the kinetic energy that's coming up to the soil that's needs time. And so what you were saying earlier about having the effort, and it's the onus on the person to integrate into community. I find that I'm in a season like that, having recently moved to a new state. And sometimes I do get frustrated that community members aren't reaching out to me, but I need to root down myself and realize I'm transplanting my soil here, and maybe I won't see the fruit until next season. But I really loved that analogy that you did of the fig tree.
Thank you, Megan. And yes, to encourage you, I think I love words. So even the word belonging for me is a longing to be seen and known by the people around you. And that takes time. So I think even as you adjust to a new place, we have to have grace for the people around us to accept us and draw us in and ask us questions and get to know us. And that only comes by us telling our stories and being vulnerable and making ourselves able to be seen and known. So but
and also welcoming the response.
Right.
Because sometimes I think, like you, Megan, I think, well, this community should be doing X, Y, Z. And like, maybe I should be building a sense of belonging by welcoming more. And so I know that it's always back to me to be the opener, to be the can opener in these situations.
I just have empathy for refugee families or immigrant families when we start seeing how difficult it is to break in to a community, even if you're American and you have the same culture. How much more difficult is it for those around us? So that's often what inspires me to make the change, do the thing that's going to help.
And so you've talked about personal faith. I wonder also about what's the connection with personal resilience in and through belonging and disruption.
I think resilience is something that you don't know you have until you're tested and need to acquire it. I don't think I would have been called a resilient little girl when I was growing up in the comfort of my family and my home. But it's through the trials that we become resilient. And I think, like Doreen, you said, it's brave. Sometimes it's brave to make these changes, and it requires you to go even if you're scared, and to make choices, even if you don't know how they're going to turn out. Because I think for me, rather a life lived than wondering what it would have been like had I said yes, had I, so I think I don't have any great inspiring things about resilience except to say put yourself in hard places and you'll grow that skill for sure.
Definitely. I think that the people that I have interviewed the most on the subject of resilience, it's something that is a byproduct of tough decisions and tough circumstances.
That's a very good way of putting it, a
Af-
byproduct. Yeah.
after you've lived through it and done the hard things and made the brave choices and the sacrifices, then all of a sudden you go, oh, look, I grew resilience muscles. It's amazing. And
Absolutely.
I guess that's from my perspective, also from as being more elderly in the expat lane, is that I never considered myself resilient.
Mhm.
Yeah, not me. And that I think perhaps is interesting because perhaps if we visualized ourselves or we acted into being the resilient person and lived into that, maybe we would have faster results. Just a thought, food for thought.
I would have to agree. I think I had to do that exercise when I was really struggling during those COVID years. I had to remind myself, but look what you've done. You've traveled with three small children across the world. You've, made a new life happen twice over, three times over. You are resilient, you are brave, you are capable. And I think there's often times in our life where we need to remind ourselves what we have achieved, and not to wear it as a badge of honor and wow, look how great I am, but rather just look how far I've come, look what I can do. And just in that, you can then have the hope to say, well, then I can also break into this new community and belong again. I've done it before and I can do it again.
Mm, yeah, well done. So, how might organizations, let's turn away from the personal to the corporate. Many of our expats and our nomad listeners are connected to an organization or a corporation or a government or some sort of entity. How might those entities better support their people and their communities? To build and maintain a sense of community belonging, when you hit the ground. I mean, it can't be something that's delayed first. Oh, I'll start belonging in a year.
Right, right. I think this is where I've learned the most from a corporate environment where I do also do some change consulting, is just recognizing William Bridges talks about the four P's. So to tell the people, okay, what is the purpose of this change? Why do we have to move? Why are you an empty nester? Well, the kids have left. What is the purpose of this change, whether it's a merger or an acquisition? And that just reminds everyone, okay, change happens. We have to adapt. So the next P is picture. And this for me is key, is giving people a vision for the future of what it could look like on the other side. So this is where I think organizations can plan ahead and say, when you get to the other side, there will be this in place and that in place and this community to join and these things to do, so that when the people arrive, those things are there. I think that's a missing piece for people to just expect to get on with it once they get there. Um, and then the next P is plan. So let's plan that out. What will that look like? In 4 weeks, we'll be doing this. In 8 weeks, we'll be doing that. In 12 weeks,
Mhm.
expect that. And no plan is perfect, but to have one in place takes away a lot of the anxiety and uncertainty that people feel in transition. And then the last P is part. And that for me is giving each person who is going through the transition a role to play, because that can also be the flip side of it, is that the organization does have all these things in place, but the person transitioning can feel like the victim. Well, woe is me. I've had to move. I've had to make this change. But if you give them a role to play and say, well, in this change, here's what you need to do. You need to initiate relationships. You need to show up at these events, or whatever the case is, just to give them a part to play helps them take ownership of the change that they have either willingly or unwillingly agreed to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like just making people feel part of the process and makes them feel less out of control with what's going on.
Those are all very helpful.
Good.
I love that framework.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Carolyn, in one of our correspondence, you talked about a dazzle of zebras. Will you bring in that into context here too?
Absolutely. I like my African metaphors. I hope you remember me by them. And I'll say zebras, not zebras, just for context.
Zebras, yes. Please, thank you.
Again, zebras are social animals, so you'll often find them in a herd. And when they're in a herd, you'll find 1 or 2, even 3 zebras with their heads resting on the back of another zebra's shoulders. And I remember looking at this and going, I wonder why they do that. And when I read up about it, it is number 1 for social bonding. But the other reason is to be looking over the other one's shoulder to say, is the lion coming? Do you see the lion coming? Which angle is the lion coming from? So it just gave me this beautiful vision for community, because that's what it is. We can't live in isolation. We can't rely on ourselves when things are hard. We need to put ourselves in the place where other people have our backs, literally, and can support us if things go wrong, or if things are going well, they can celebrate us. There is a reason God put us in community. And I just feel like the collective noun, a dazzle of zebras, was just the perfect analogy for how dazzling community can be if we make the effort to be in it and find our sense of belonging again. It's worth the effort.
Yeah, dazzle of zebras. I'm gonna think about that next time I'm in my pickleball group. Dazzling.
There you go. It's just all the black and white. They are the most spectacular animals. You think, how will they not get spotted in the bush? But it's just the shade and light and shade is what helps them get away. But they have to be heard. So
yes. Excellent. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We have a fun lightning round that we'd like to ask you a couple of questions. Do you want to go first, Megan?
Yes. Yeah, Carolyn, thank you for all of your South African analogies. And I'm wondering if you could teleport to another country right now for 24 hours, which country would you go to?
I think I'd have to go back home. So my dad turns 80 this year, and it'd be wonderful for me to spend 24 hours with him and my sister who turned 50. Those are always the times I miss being at home to celebrate milestones like that. So there's nothing quite like the African sun for me, and to be on African soil. So yeah, home girl I am.
And if there was one language that you could just immediately be downloaded into your brain, which language would you choose to know?
I took French in high school, and I wish I knew it better so that I could more confidently travel to France or any country that was French speaking. And the other one would be Spanish, because my girls are learning Spanish and they are catching up and talking to each other, and I don't know what they're saying. So between the two of those, that's what I would choose.
So thank you for joining us today, everybody, on Nomadic Diaries. This was Carolyn Grant, Megan Norton, and Doreen Cumberford, and we just love being here speaking about the subject of belonging. So for today, it is sayonara, ma salama, and hasta luego.
Thank you. Goodbye. Au revoir.